Welcome to Author Life Podcast, where myself and guest authors share their stories, offer tips and advice, and share our writing, publishing, and marketing knowledge. I'm your host, Delcherie Gladden. So welcome back to the podcast. We're back with Bestselling Reads authors. We have a smaller group today, but we're going to be talking about villains, tips for writing villains, what makes a good villain, and just kind of overall discussing what we've learned over our years in writing about creating great villains that readers can connect with. And before we jump into that, I'll have everybody who's here today introduce themselves. So AJ, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Thank you, Delcherie. Thanks for setting this up. I love hanging out with you guys. I look forward to these sessions. And so my name is AJ Llewellyn. I'm a hybrid author. I have publishers. I'm also self-published, but I write romantic mysteries. I have 333 books published, and I'm actually working on a new mystery series right now, which is fun. And so it's perfect for today's topic.
Awesome. Great. And Alan?
I'm sorry, I'm still stunned at that 333 books.
I know.
I know, no wonder I'm tired.
Yeah, that must be like a book a day.
Well, early in my career, I had publishing dates, 2 books a month. It almost killed me, but I did it.
Oh, gosh.
Because as you all know, you sell from your back catalog. Mm-hmm. So my back catalog has kept me going, but it was a lot. I'm sorry. Go on, Alan.
It's okay. I'm Alan McDermott. I've written 15 books, mostly action thrillers, but there's a couple of serial killer stories that I've written. And the latest one, which will be out on July the 1st, is a spy story. My first one of those.
Awesome.
Sounds great.
Yeah, excited for that. And Scott?
Hi, Scott Burry, author of, I think, 15 books now. I haven't really counted, and they're not all online right at the moment, but, and my latest one is a historical fantasy. And yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about villains.
Nice. And yes, don't forget at the end, I think you with your podcast, and Alan has a new book coming out, so remind me to give those a little shout out before we sign off at the end of the podcast today. And I'm Delcherie Gladden. I host the podcast and I write all over the place in whatever genre I can focus on at the moment. I'm trying to work on a romantic comedy and got kind of stuck, so we'll see what I bounce to next. Something with villains, maybe. Maybe this will inspire me to get back to a mystery or one of my dark romances that are a little bit more villain focused. But all right, well, let's jump into the topic. Alan, since you have a spy thriller that's about to come out, I'll go to you first and just kind of, I guess, give us an idea of what type of villain you've written in the past and kind of what your process has been.
I'm thinking back on the villains. In my second book, there was a hitman who used to use injections to immobilize his victims.
What was in the injections?
It was a muscle relaxant. I did some research at the time, but I cannot remember what it was now. I think it was some derivative of a blowfish or something. It's been a while since I read that one. I've got a Russian who was nicknamed the Bear because he looks like one and smells like one as well. He's a huge guy. He's got arms the size of people's legs. His chest is 1 meter across. He's full head of hair, bushy beard, and a distinct lack of personal hygiene. So he's my latest villain. But in between, I've just had the normal bad guys, the the gangland bosses. Yeah, just your typical normal villain.
Okay. All right. AJ, what types of villains have you used in some of your stories?
Well, I've got a lot of mystery books out there, and one of my favorite series, I was thinking about this today, knowing we were discussing this, but I have a series that's done very well for me about a U.S. Marshal. And so the series is called Honeybone. And Dean Honeybone is a U.S. Marshal who travels to Australia to extradite a serial killer to America. And it's actually based on a true story, but they're plane crashes. And the only survivors are Dean Honeybone and a little Aboriginal girl. Everybody else dies, but they cannot find the serial killer's body. He was handcuffed to Honeybone, which is what they do, but Honeybone's wrist is almost demolished. They have to rebuild his hand, and they cannot find the guy's body. And they line up all the bodies on the ocean shores. They find different victims, but one of the things I discovered is that a lot of crack addicts lose their fingerprints from the pipe.
Huh.
And I never knew that before. So I actually spent a lot of time interviewing law enforcement people when I was researching the book. And they know none of the I had are all distorted. None of them are him, none of the body parts. But as the series continues, Dean Honeybone is still trying to find this guy. And this guy is torturing him. And so there are 6 books out. 7th one is about to come out soon, but we don't know if he's alive or dead. It's either someone impersonating him. But I've had so many emails and a lot of reviews about this character because he's based on a real person. It was a case I covered when I was a journalist in Australia, and it haunted me. This guy killed women and girls, actually with his wife. The 2 of them would abduct them. So I think the most compelling villains are like ordinary people that aren't necessarily freaky looking or, they all have a calling card. They all do deranged things. But I think if they seem to pass as normal people, but they do these horrible things, I find that really compelling. And I know readers do too. I had readers that were very upset that the serial killer was killing women, but it happens. And I guess because I'm a romance novelist, they kept saying, well, can't he just shoot them? Does he have to abduct them and do all these things? Well, I'm sorry, I'm trying to write something interesting. So I really like the character of Dean Honeybone. He ends up adopting the little girl. He and his partner, they take her in. And it was really nice to be able to write about Aboriginal characters because I come from Australia and we've done terrible wrongs to the Aborigines there, and I was really glad to be able to talk about those issues as well. So there's romance, there's mystery, and there's a child who's alive.
Awesome. That sounds really cool.
Thank you.
All right. Scott, tell us about your villains.
Well, the thing I always think about villains is that no one thinks of themselves as the villain. Everybody thinks they're the good guy. And so who think their motives are laudable. So in my Dark Age series, in the first one, The Bones of the Earth, the villain, the ultimate villain, was someone who, she was the lady who killed Attila the Hun on their wedding night, and she thought that she was restoring the world to a good order. In another book, in a mystery novel I wrote, The Dead Man Lying, there was a series of villains, and each one thought that they were acting to protect someone else. And then they crossed the line, they went too far and I think that's if you're trying to write a realistic character, I think that's the dividing line, or the crux of it, is to make someone, commit a terrible deed, but for reasons that seem, according to some kind of logic, to be toward a greater good.
Yeah, I think that I can't remember where this came from, or I'm sure someone better than me said it originally. But it was something along the lines of like, creating a villain, if it's just like evil for evil's sake, that's not very believable. That realistic villains, they aren't like completely immoral or, just terrible, horrible people. Like they have their own moral system that they've developed that they think is right, that they are committed to, and they're going to make their decisions and take action based on their own sense of morality. Like it's not just, this free-for-all that, bad people or bad characters, just don't have any sort of guidance, but they really do, and they think they're doing what's right or what's going to benefit them or some cause, and that can really go astray at times and lead to some situations and outcomes that aren't good for the other people in the story. Yeah.
One of the most compelling serial killers in recent history in America is the Golden State Killer. Do you all know about him?
Yeah.
Do you know about him, Ellen?
I've heard of him.
He operated in the 70s and 80s. I'll keep it brief. The authorities didn't know who he was for the longest time. He is the most prolific rapist in American history. But he started killing the women. His motive was control. His motive was he thought he was the smartest guy in the room. And as time went on, a mystery novelist, Michelle McDermott, she really wanted to find out who this guy was, and she did a ton of research, and she went to the police because this guy stopped. He went dormant, which is very rare for serial killers. But thanks to her, she died actually before he was captured. But he was a cop. In the 70s and 80s, he was a police officer. And he had a family, he had kids. But we still don't know why he stopped. We still don't know a decent motive because he was doing horrible things. But in his mind, when the media started saying, well, he always targets single women, he never goes for couples, he started killing couples. And I think for some of them, it's a control thing. It's this, I'm powerful. You should be afraid of me. That is terrifying to me. There's no real motive.
Yeah. And kind of back on what Scott was saying about kind of being those ordinary killers. I think you see, I love like murder mysteries and crime documentaries. And there's a series, I think it's on Netflix, Mindhunter. It was kind of like the birth of FBI profiling and categorizing these serial killers and stuff. And I think anyone looking to write a really complex villain should give that series a try, because it really
they should read the books.
Oh yeah,
they're based.
You get a lot more out of the books.
This book, Mindhunter, and he wrote a series of books. You can't beat the books, but yes, the Netflix series wasn't bad. I'm sorry they're not doing season 2.
I know. I kept waiting for it.
All the readers, all the listeners are out there. Read the books.
Yeah, but yeah,
He's
that was
an amazing
one where
man. I interviewed him.
Oh, really?
He was the one that told me about the fingertips, the drug addicts with the crack pipes, that it distorts their fingertips. Boy, did I use that. I wrote a whole series based on it. But had I not met this guy, and had he not told me this, I've never read it anywhere.
Yeah, I haven't
so
heard
it's
that.
really good to do research. And I have to say that if you're going to write about mysteries, you've got to research cops. Every state has different rules, as you know. Every country has different laws, and I think it's really important to know this stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
to bring
and
that
also thinking about
realism.
serial killers, and sort of, I guess this kind of goes against my first statement that everyone thinks that they're a good guy. Um, I think Canada's most notorious serial killer was Paul Bernardo.
Yeah.
Um, and, handsome guy, seemed to have everything going for him, and, you know, raped and tortured and ultimately killed a series of young women, um, seemingly for fun.
Mm.
Um, and, videotaped it. And, so maybe it's a form of madness. I can't imagine how you would, what kind of good Bernardo thought he was doing.
And I'm sure, there are those outliers of people who don't make any sense, who defy explanation. But I think like you and Alan were saying that a lot of, villains are not those extraordinary types. I think if you're writing that kind of type of villain in every single book, that can possibly get exhausting for readers.
Right.
That having some of those more realistic, seemingly on the outside normal villains is very compelling, and readers are drawn to that. So I think, well, kind of like, the person next to you, like, could that be someone doing terrible things in their off time? And, or, thinking about, I think people also on some level think like, what are you yourself capable of? And, what brings a person to a point where they do something, hurtful or terrible to someone else. And I think the series that I had the most fun writing villains in was my Someone Wicked series. And a lot of that was like, it was really hard for the characters themselves to know who were the villains, if they were the villain, if the people around them were people that they could trust, and what their help and their teaching was actually leading them through. And it's a big theme throughout that series is, what does make someone into a villain. How much control over your own life and actions do you have? And it's paranormal, so there's, an element of these weird powers that they have that they're trying to figure out, that complicates them, these siblings figuring out even more whether they are good or bad, and whether they can control the ultimate answer to that question. But that one was a really fun one to work on, the villains, because I had a variety when it came to the different villains that they faced, and their own like internal conflict in that series. And it really like pushed me to, like, I guess, do more research and expand what I thought of as villains. And because, when you're writing a series where there are so many potential villains, they can't all be the same. They've all got to have different
Right.
motivations and different goals that they're trying to achieve, and different paths too of how they ended up at the point they are in the story, and what's gonna trigger those paths to diverge into different places. So that was a fun one, because it really made me think a lot harder about who my villains were and what their motivations were for doing what they did. And I think that's an important part of creating villains, is figuring out that motivation. Why are they doing the things that they're doing? Because I think you as a writer, like, in reality, you can't always answer that question. But I think as a writer, you need to know that answer for your villains to be able to write them effectively, and have them be realistic and believable for the reader.
That's true too, but I also think stringing readers along and making them guess is really important as well.
Mm-hmm.
One of them, Alan, one of my favorite series that I watched on Amazon was Martin Clunes in Manhunt. Did you see that series?
No, I didn't see that. No.
What was great about it is that Martin Clunes is such an adorable person. And he did the TV series Doc Martin, which is huge all over the world, playing a doctor who was a world-class surgeon who had to give it up because he can't handle the sight of blood. And so it's a comedy series where he goes to a country town. And so for him to play this real-life detective, his name was Colin Sutton. And Colin Sutton headed up an 11-year investigation in England to the Night Stalker. We have one in America and they have one. And for 11 years, they had no idea who this guy was. But they had no access to all the stuff that we have now. DNA, computers, cell phone tower pings. And this guy had an unusual calling card. He'd go after old people, break into their homes, and he'd remove the light bulbs. There were 3 series. And what I found interesting was Martin Clunes, who played Colin Sutton, and these series were based on his books. He said he would get depressed going into each series, playing this character. It's grueling to watch, but why I'm mentioning it is that you start to get a picture over 3 seasons of who the killer is and what his motivations are, but we don't know it from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
It's so clever because it's almost like he's psychic. He starts to intuitively figure out what this guy is doing and why he's doing it. And it's really great to watch because there's not a lot of blood and gore. There's no guns, no shooting, no violence. If it was an American series, there'd be gore, and we'd probably see all the murders up close. But I really think it's the psychological terror that keeps people reading and watching.
Yeah, I think creating that suspense for the reader of, just giving those little bits and little hints about the villain and why and how and all of that. That's part of the mystery as well, whether it's an actual mystery, I think, or any type of story where you have an antagonist of some sort, even in, romances and, coming of age or personal drama type stuff, there's always that antagonistic either character or force that the reader's trying to understand. And, if you give it all away right at the beginning, you kind of lose that suspense early on.
You got to give the readers reasons to keep forming new theories as to what's the reason, and then if it's a series or whatever, or even just a book, they're going to turn the page or watch the next episode to find out, was I right? Is this how it all works? And the more twists that you can put into it, the longer you can stretch that whole process out.
Yeah.
And hopefully the more readers you'll have.
Exactly. Tell their friends about it and get more people.
Yeah. How long did it take you to figure this out? That's why I sort of gave up on TV primetime mystery shows, because you could always tell who the villain was. Like, would be the third person to show up on screen. Okay, that's the bad guy. They all follow the formulas.
Yeah, definitely. I think with that type of TV, the formulas play a pretty strong hand in writing the episodes. Get a little bit more freedom and variety, I think, with novels, because you have that room and it's, less of a collective project, I guess, where you have to follow, the certain guidelines that you're going on. But I was thinking too with villains, I think a part that is sometimes difficult when you're developing a villain in the first place is balancing what they're currently doing in the story with the backstory and everything that came before it. So if anybody has tips on kind of what your process is in developing a backstory for a villain and then integrating that into a story without just like info dumping or giving everything away too soon, what are your tactics for that?
I try to instead of doing info dumps, I tried to drip feed the information. So a little bit here, a little bit there, maybe a couple of chapters later, something else. If there's a major part that we need to know, then hey, that will get a lot of page time. But yeah, I think drip feeding it in is a much better way because it keeps the reader interested. And oh, what else did he do? What else did he do? That's what I'd like to do.
If you could guess, Alan.
I kind of think of adding, the backstories or the larger bits of information, yet as it sort of comes up in the story. So when I try to think of it this way, like if the reader thinks, oh, wait a minute, where did that come from, or why is that happening? And just give enough information that will satisfy that initial craving, and then, but over the course of the book, then you develop that full story. But it takes a lot of planning, so that first of all you get it in. It doesn't have to be a chronological order, but a logical order that you can see how the
most interesting characters to me. I don't know if you guys know, the most prolific serial arsonist in America was the Glendale Fire Department chief.
Yes. I watched that just a couple of weeks ago on Forensic Detectives.
Yeah,
know.
This guy, John Orr, he's fascinating to me because to your point, Del Cherie, he was the fire captain for Glendale, which was not a particularly prestigious station. But for 15 years, they had unprecedented fires, and it took them a long time to realize it was him. He's not only setting them, but he's the first one to arrive and putting them out. But when I read there's been several books about him. His motivation was that he kept failing the police department exams. He wanted to be with LAPD. Then he wanted to be with LA Fire Department. They kept failing him, saying, this guy has psychological problems. That's a hard thing to overcome when you're trying to be a cop. Mm-hmm. But somehow Glendale said, oh, we'll take him. And Home of the Rejects will take him. But he would have gone on undetected had he not murdered 5 people in a fire.
Oh, geez.
And I went on a walking tour of Glendale where they took us to the location of the fire where he killed these people. And he kept saying, well, first of all, he denied he did it, but we know he did. Google him, it's fascinating. But his whole thing was, I didn't mean to kill him. I meant to get in there and save everyone. Well, that's how they caught him, because he was the first fire department officer on the scene, and they couldn't figure out how he got there because dispatch was given the wrong address. But somehow he got there. And they thought, this is a bit weird. And so his motivation is sort of clear, but not. And so, he's a fruitcake. But I think what Scott said is true. Yes, it needs to be in there somewhere when you're telling the story, but it still doesn't excuse it or forgive it, whatever the background is.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that kind of goes to that balance of figuring out how to give a villain some level of sympathy that the reader can connect with, and so they feel like a real person, but still, they're still doing terrible things, and it's okay to also want them to get caught or pay for their crimes, or but I think that mix of conflicting emotions that you can create in the reader can help that really forge a connection and make the story a lot more compelling. If it's like, yeah, I can understand on one level, but can't go around just burning people's houses down and inadvertently killing people. That's not okay.
I think also something it can really help, raise that attention, that engagement with the story is to make it, the villain smart enough and doing something sort of ambitious, and then the reader almost wants them to succeed at it. I remember watching, as a kid, Hitchcock movies, and you see the villains, working on this elaborate plan. You think, what? That's brilliant. But if he can pull it off, it's, I don't think he's going to be able to pull it off. And you see him almost getting there, and you think, yes, just reach a little farther, you'll do it. And then you think, wait a minute, this is the bad guy. I'm rooting for the bad guy.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, because when you were telling that, which I think is a really good point, I remember one of the first horror movies I saw was Psycho. And Janet Leigh stole the money, but I wanted her to get away with it. When she got into that shower and she was stabbed, I was like, get out of the shower! Thief, but I wanted her to be okay, and she wasn't.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking of the movie, the one that always comes to mind for me is Strangers on a Train. And there's a scene where the bad guy, he's stolen the good guy's keys, but he drops them down a sewer grate, and he's got his hand jammed between the grate, and he's reaching for these keys, and time's running out, and you see a clock ticking, and you think, oh, just you've almost got it, but but that's the bad guy. You don't want him to get the keys.
Yeah, and I think I've mentioned this series before, from another indie author that I'm friends with, and Melissa Askew Ousley, and her Soul Spear trilogy. This is still one of my favorite villains from anything I've read. When you first are introduced to the villain, you're kind of just like, oh my gosh, what the heck? What's going on with this guy? But she did such a good job of making him so complex and really developing a backstory that over the 3 books, as you learn more about what his family put him through, all of the things that were done to him, and why he made these decisions over time. And even though it's led to some really awful things throughout the story, by the last book, I was really he was my favorite character. Almost.
Which book is it?
It's called the Soulless Beer trilogy. It's young adult, not really paranormal, but kind of magical realism. It's an alternate universe. But he was just such a well-developed character that by the end, I was so sympathetic toward him, and you really could understand why he did all of the things he did, and you wanted there to be some way by the end that I'm can it just work out for everybody? Right. He doesn't really deserve the price he's gonna have to pay for everything he did. And it was actually really emotional and sad, when you get to the ending, and everything resolves in a way that makes sense, that is realistic and logical for the story. But it kind of broke my heart at the end, and you're just but I didn't really want everyone to have to pay for their mistakes. Because she did such a good job just creating these complex, sympathetic characters. I think that's something, I love mysteries. I read it and watch a lot of mysteries, and the villain will be the first thing when you get to it that I'll know, either, yeah, I'm gonna read every book in the series, binge watch this episode, or the series on TV, depending on what it is. If that villain, if you're kind of okay, yeah, I can see where this is going. This is the type of villain we're dealing with here. And sometimes you get that with mysteries or different things where you're just yeah, early on you know what you're getting into, and it's kind of probably not one I'm going to continue on with. But when I can have that sympathy and connection with a villain, that's something that right then I know I'm going to keep going with this.
Alan, who's your favorite villain that you've ever read? Since Joshua just talked about that.
I've ever written. I would say it was in 15 Times a Killer. That's the tale of a serial killer who's being chased by the FBI. And again, as has been mentioned before, he's got his motives and he thinks that he's doing something worthwhile.
So what about a serial killer that somebody else has written, that you've read? What was your favorite one to read?
I don't think I've read many serial killer stories, to be honest. No, I can't say I have. Most of the stories I tend to read will be action thrillers like Tom Clancy, political thrillers, things like that. So you know who the bad guy is. It's the politician, isn't it?
So,
Read or to write?
to read.
To read. Favorite villain. Well, I like the villain. I mean, I didn't like him, but I appreciated the villain in 15 Times a Killer. I don't. I mean, there's some great villains, like comic book type characters. The Joker is one. I think Thanos from the Marvel universe is a really, especially the way it was originally written in the comics, a really interesting, deep, complex character. I kind of like those kinds of villains who've got a lot of reasons. Let's see. The books I find I like the best don't really have a villain per se, but actually one of the most fascinating, and it turns out a villain. You don't think they're a villain because they're kind of comical. It's from science fiction, Larry Niven's Ringworld. Anybody familiar with that? Mm-hmm. And so the villains, it's a 50-year-old book, so it's not a spoiler alert. But anyway, the villain turns out to be the puppeteer, which is an alien, and it's kind of the protagonist of the story. It gets the story going. It's the reason for the journey to the ring world. And then it turns out like, yeah, we created this whole thing and then we destroyed it, and because we thought it was a threat. So, but now we're seeing if we can exploit it. And they, it's a long story, and the backstory is like thousands of years long or something. But you just look at, wow, these are the most selfish SOBs in the universe, literally in the known universe, because it's from the series called Tales of Known Space. But at the same time, you think, thinking being, there's logic here.
Yeah, so, my favorite villain of all time, mystery fiction, is Agatha Christie.
Oh, really?
She wrote a book called The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. And the book is narrated by a guy who she created the concept of the unreliable narrator. Mm. A concept I absolutely love, because the guy telling the story is actually the killer. Mm. But you would never suspect him. He's so ordinary. He's the butler, and he's so proper.
The butler did it.
Yeah. But it's such a clever book, because you really do think all these other people are the suspects, and it's him. But I like those books. I also like Thomas Harris's books, yeah. Silence of the Lambs and Manhunter. Those characters are chilling. And he wrote those two books after going to forensic science classes at Quantico. And they're both based on real people, those two characters. Wow. So again, research is really cool. You find out the weirdest stuff.
You really do. I thought it was funny, Alan, that you mentioned in one of at the beginnings about the blowfish toxin.
Yeah.
I've actually used something similar in my Eliza Carlisle mystery. I was like, oh, other people have researched that too.
I read a book where the characters were eating blowfish sushi, and I can't remember the book now, but blowfish is so toxic. Mm-hmm. Unless it's actually cleaned properly, it'll kill you.
Yeah.
But all these people, this actually goes on around the world, they'll eat raw blowfish hoping they survive.
Yeah.
It's like Russian
Well, and
roulette.
the the toxin or one of the toxins involved, like at one point, it was kind of um, used recreationally because it induces this kind of zombie like state, and so it was used in some more the word is leaving my mind, but different cultures and kind of like ritualistic or ceremonial activities. And that was kind of where I learned about it from, because I was looking for something that would, put someone in a state where they couldn't react and or couldn't do anything physically. And but you can easily die from experimenting with this sort of thing. And
people do this for fun.
Yeah, but it led me down all kinds of rabbit holes.
As dull as Ottawa.
Mm-hmm.
Alan, I have to say something funny, because you said you like Tom Clancy's books. My friend bought his house in Maryland.
Tom Clancy.
And I'm sorry? Yeah.
Yeah.
And she can't sell it, but she gets freaks and weirdos showing up night and day. These right-wing, batshit crazy people in full combat gear, weapons, showing up on her lawn. You can imagine with COVID and all this stuff, you really don't want to see that on your lawn at 4 a.m. Oh, where's the helipad? They're holding these gigantic weapons. We want a photo on the helipad. She had to demolish it because he had such an ego. He built a helipad. She had to get rid of it, but they still show up. But I just think it's funny that you buy a house that a mystery writer wrote, and all these wannabe authors think if they come out there in full combat gear and get a photo, I guess it's going to inspire them. I don't know.
Oh gosh, that sounds awful.
Crazy. Yeah. We've been trying to sell it ever since I met him.
Oh no. Well, hopefully she manages it.
If you want a deal on a house in Maryland.
Oh man. Yeah, that.
There's something I on my bike ride today, apropos of something completely different. I just thought of that old trope too from AJ. You mentioned the how Agatha Christie invented the unreliable narrator, but I don't know if it came from Agatha Christie or what. But I do remember a cliche from bad mysteries that the killer or the criminal always returns to the scene of the crime. And I was thinking today, like, no, why would you do that?
They do.
You get out of there as fast as I can and stay far away.
I know, but they do. That's one of the cliches, but it's actually accurate. Huh. And the police, whenever there's a funeral of a murder victim, whenever there's a vigil, they will go there and surreptitiously video everyone, because the perpetrator always shows up. They're so proud of what they've done, and they're so glorifying the attention. Yes, it's a cliche, but it's really, really true. Hey, I wouldn't do it. If I'd done something, I wouldn't go back. Listen, when I was 4...
I guess you're not a villain.
No. Well, I was. When I was 4, I stole a candy bar at a store. Well, it was a little chocolate. And my mother made me take it back. And I stood there crying because I really wanted that chocolate. And the storekeeper thanked me for taking it back. But I promise you, I would not have gone back if my mother didn't make me to the scene of my crime. But I've never stolen anything since.
Well, I think that it kind of brings up another interesting aspect of developing villains, and that's the psychology behind it. And and it kind of ties in with motivation as well, but like the reason that there is profiling and that there's studying of criminals and serial killers, or that there are some of those patterns that you can look at. And yes, with media, a lot of that has become kind of cliche, but if they are realistic, if those are really things that these type of people engaging in those activities and crimes are doing, then that's not necessarily something that you have to steer away from, of like, oh well, that's in every murder plot, that they come back to the scene of the crime or insert themselves into the investigation. and yeah, maybe you don't want that to be like your only thing that you're relying on. But I do think it is really important to do the research and to understand the psychology of what's going on in like a real villain's mind, and using some of that, and not just, well, they had this bad thing happen in their life, and now they do these terrible things, but to really like delve into it and try to understand your character as though they were a real person. So yeah, if anybody has kind of some experiences of doing that, and how that process went for you, please share.
Well, my favorite villain that I've written was Kriemhild in The Bones of the Earth, and it's sort of, she's a terrible witchy person, and so it's fun to write that kind of narcissism and confidence in a character. She is absolutely rock solid, certain she's right about everything, and whatever she does is for the accomplishment of her own goals, and nothing's going to stand in her way. So that makes her fun to write. I hope that it makes her kind of interesting. And then the other thing I tried to do, and I'm again borrowing from other authors, this one from Tolkien, is just I tried to throw in little hints as to the long backstory. So just little touches that give the reader the idea that, oh, this is something really ancient, but also enough information that, if they want to, you can look it up. You can find out, you can, for example, Google Kriemhild and find out that, one of the legends about her is that, yes, she was Attila's fourth wife and he died on their wedding night. So knowing the full backstory of your character, and also their goals. What are they trying to accomplish? Because you're not going to go through, there's got to be a payoff somewhere. There's got to be a goal that they're working towards.
Mm-hmm. I think the thing about villains is, for me, I like to get the law enforcement viewpoint of a villain. And I always find it interesting how they interpret them. And because I don't necessarily feel like I have to sympathize with the villain, but I certainly want to get a feel for that character. And when I started writing my Orgasmic Texas Dawn series with my partner, DJ Manley, there are 13 books in that series. She died before we could write the next one, but I worked with a U.S. Marshal, another one that I met. He was actually the husband of a prosecutor I knew. And I think I've told this story before, so I hope I'm not repeating myself, but he was in Honolulu for Christmas a couple of years ago, the same time I was. And we went to the airport together, and he could pick out the bad guys, even the bad woman. I didn't even know what he was looking at. It was so interesting to me, we started talking at the beginning of this conversation about ordinary people who do terrible things. That is the concept I find the most interesting, because I think people can relate to someone snapping, or someone finally doing something that, look at Jeffrey Dahmer. People said, oh, he was so quiet and he was so polite. Yeah, he was in there eating your next door neighbor. People did not expect him to be a cannibal or a terrible serial killer. Mm-hmm. But they do exist, and they are people we live next door to. But I found that really interesting to learn how law enforcement, especially U.S. Marshals, and the discrepancies, that is really interesting to me.
Yeah, definitely. Alan, did you have anything?
No, no, sorry.
Oh, no, yeah, I just didn't want to jump in and talk over you.
But Alan, I wanted to know, been thinking about this for a while since I first read 15 Times a Killer. How did it feel to create that character?
Um, well, it was one of those what if things. Because, the scenario that set him off in the first place. These big corporations, they break the law and then they pay a fine and they say, we don't admit any guilt, and they just carry on. But I thought, what if someone decided that they wouldn't take the money? They wanted to see them prosecuted, but no lawyer would do it. What would he do? So that's how I came up with his motivation.
So that's kind of in a way similar to Tom Gray himself, right? Like,
yeah,
the law wasn't doing what I
the law
think
wasn't doing what it should have done.
Yeah.
For him. Yes, it was doing what the law normally does, but it wasn't good enough for that person. Yeah.
And I think that brings up another important aspect for a lot of villain characters, not all of them, but kind of where that breaking point is, and developing that arc of what led up to the breaking point, what happens when someone does break, and then how does that resolve. And that's going to be different depending on the situation. But I think an important thing with that is making that arc realistic, especially what leads up to the breaking point. I can't remember which. It was one of the Marvel movies. It was several years ago and my mind's totally blanking, but I remember having a conversation with a friend about it. We had both recently seen it, and she hated it because she didn't think that the villain's breaking point was realistic enough, and that his switch from someone who'd been wronged and who had been hurt by this company, I can't remember what it was, and then he decides, I think it was one of the Batman ones, maybe it was DC, not Marvel, that he starts going after the people and killing them and becomes this villain in the comic. And we kind of had a little bit of an argument about whether or not that was realistic. And sometimes that's just not going to connect with other people. But I think you do have to really evaluate the breaking point and what you as the writer are showing the reader to make that a believable point where, yeah, I can understand why someone would just lose it at that point and do something that would normally be uncharacteristic for them.
That's why Taxi Driver was such a monster success, and still is, because De Niro really and Scorsese really captured an ordinary man just going totally nuts. But it's so well constructed visually and the writing and the directing that you believe it. But those are the stories that I think are really interesting when you go, okay, I see that. So I take your point that it worked for you and didn't work for your friends. So I think that's what makes life interesting and villains interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and not everybody's always going to connect with, a villain or just characters in general, and you can't really help that as a writer. But I think a lot of the tips that everybody shared today, as far as, researching and, really evaluating motivation and psychology and, digging a little bit deeper into villains, I think that helps develop characters that a wider number of readers, at least, are going to connect with on some level or sympathize with, and really just, stay interested in seeing what happens and how things turn out for the villain and for the victims or the other characters in the story.
I would really strongly suggest to people to do all the research they can, and don't be afraid to email law enforcement. When I started my Mingo McLeod series, which is one of my favorites, He's a forensic accountant in Honolulu, and he investigates crimes on the side. But I contacted a forensic accountant who's done criminal cases. And in fact, he did the Scott Peterson case, the guy that murdered his pregnant wife. He was the accountant on that, and I called him. And I said, can I interview you? Because I'd seen him on a TV show. And I didn't really know what a forensic accountant did, but after I interviewed Marty Lafford, I interviewed a few of them. And each one of these people said to me, they all do criminal cases, but each of them said to me, and Marty Lafford's the biggest guy in the world. He does court cases all over the world. He lives in Beverly Hills, but he's been all these different countries, and he'll call me and tell me a case he's worked on once it's solved, and I think, I can use that. But all of them, all these professionals said to me, I'm a frustrated writer. I'd love to help you. Ask me questions. And a lot of these guys that have obscure jobs, but essential jobs in a criminal case, are totally overlooked by writers. So don't be afraid to contact them. They'll be so thrilled. And they'll give you the juiciest stuff. For example, one of the things that Marty Lafford told me, which I didn't know, is that 95% of the world's currency has traces of 3 drugs: cocaine, marijuana on the paper, and the third one, can you guess what it is? Cholesterol medicine. So all these drug traffickers might be making money, but they're totally stressed out. So of course I threw that in my book. But I love that. There's traces of cholesterol. Bad eating habits.
You can use that in a book. Yeah, the villain can't say no to extra fries.
Yeah.
I actually did the same thing. I called the FBI. I contacted them for my 15 Times a Killer because
I'm going to read that book.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure that the way I portrayed the FBI and what they actually did was correct. And it turned out that what I had in mind was absolutely nowhere near what they do. Because I was thinking, right, this FBI agent, she's going to lead the case, and no, she wouldn't do that. Oh, okay. All right, but they use the FBI lab. Where are they? LA. No, they've got their own lab. Oh, okay. So there was a lot of rewriting going on for that one.
But that's good. And they do want you to get it right. They want to help.
Yeah. Well, it did. I mean, nobody's complained to me that, you haven't portrayed the FBI properly, so maybe I did a good job on it. But it's
Scott loved it, so I'm going to read it.
Yeah. Did you do the same thing with special? What do you guys call it? MI6?
MI6.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the great thing about writing MI5 and MI6 stories. One, they're not going to respond to your emails when you ask for information. So what you do is you write anything you like, and nobody can say you're wrong, because anyone who does works for MI5 and MI6, and they're not allowed to say they work for MI5 or MI6.
Right.
So there's no one to say, no, that's not what would have happened.
Yeah.
So,
true.
I like the way that they're on opposite sides of the river.
Yes, they are. Yes.
I should try that with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, they call it.
There you go.
Give them a call.
The Mounties, they're fascinating.
Oh, the Mounties. I know a couple.
It sounds like they will not be featured in a future book of yours.
Oh, no. But, because, actually, AJ, you were mentioning working on with Aboriginal. I have a couple of ideas that I want to sort of partner with some Indigenous people here. One's a sort of a dystopian future, near future apocalypse kind of thing, and the other is an alternative history. So what I'd like to do is write I don't know who the villain would be, but I want to write an alternative history where the Haudenosaunee, or as they called it in French, the Iroquois, colonized France.
Wow, that sounds great.
Interesting. Cool. Well, we are just about out of time, so I just want to give everybody a chance. If you have one last bit of advice or anything you wanted to add, go for it.
I would say, just to reiterate, start off by making your villain believable. Right? They don't have to be 8 feet tall. They don't have to be able to leap tall buildings, anything like that. Just make them believable. Let the reader connect with them, and then the reader will go along for the ride.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, and to continue with that, give them something that the reader can identify with and agree with. Like, yeah, I really hate that kind of thing too, right? Like something small, but you know, it's a starting point. Mm-hmm. I really hate when people stick gum under the table at the restaurant.
That's a good point. I do too. I think you've got to have fun with what you're writing, and I think, you know, I've already said research is important, but I think it's really, the character's got to be real to you.
Mm-hmm.
I think if it's real to you, if he is real or she is real to you, I think the readers will connect.
I agree. Yeah, I think if you as the writer, you know, aren't connecting with that character for whatever reason, that's something to stop and say why. Because if you can't connect with them or find them believable or sympathetic or, you know, one of those things, then the reader's not going to either. Exactly. So yeah, just really, I think putting as much time into developing your villain as you do your heroes and your other characters in there, and then you're going to get just an overall more full story that are going to keep readers' attention the whole way through. Yeah. So before we finish up, if everybody wants to give, you know, their news that they have, I think AJ, you said you have something coming out as well. If you just want to give a shout out to that real quick.
That, you know, I'm actually working right now on an anthology series called Island Fever with a bunch of Hawaiian authors. They're short stories, which I'm publishing myself. I'm really proud of these authors because everyone really stepped up. Each story deals with their mysteries, dealing with specific fevers. So we've got one COVID story. So the others, everybody else really used their imagination, and somebody's done a smallpox story from 1830 in Hawaii because that almost wiped out the islands. But I'm really, really impressed with the stories, and there are villains galore, heroes galore, and diseases galore. So that comes out August 15th.
Awesome. Scott?
Yeah, the big thing for me is 2 days from now, I'm so not sure when this will air, but 2 days from taping is the official launch of the first episode of my podcast. It's called Beyond Barbarossa, and it's the first English language podcast to focus on the Eastern Front of World War II.
Fantastic.
And it's on all of your favorite and even obscure podcasting systems. So it's on Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and more.
Awesome. And then Alan?
Well, first of all, I want to warn AJ that if you are going to read 15 Times a Killer, it's very gory. But you'll find it necessarily so.
I don't. Okay, and I have to read it. Scott loves it.
As for me, I've got my 15th book is coming out in 10 days' time, 1st of July. It's my new spy novel called The Sokolov Agenda. And in the meantime, I'm going to carry on writing my 5th Eva Driscoll.
Don't forget the dog.
I haven't forgot the dog. I've just made a note, and I'm just going to get on it as soon as we sign off here.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys for taking the time on a fun day.
Tell us, Marie, you haven't told us your plans.
Oh, yeah. I'm redoing book covers at the moment I'm getting ready to work with a marketer to start getting some marketing done finally. So after that, hopefully I'm going to jump back into writing either on my romantic comedy or my Ghost Host series. That's the next one on the slate. But yeah, trying to get my life organized. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, thank you guys for taking time to come on the podcast today and chat about villains.
Thank you for having
Really appreciate
us.
it.
Yeah, thanks very much,
Bye.
Bree.
We'll see you guys next time.
See you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again for listening to Author Life Podcast. For more information on the podcast or guest authors, check out the links in the show description. If there's a topic you'd like to learn more about, find me online and send me suggestions anytime.